Hello, welcome to mission briefing for mission 4AR Showdown. So this is one of the round 4 missions for Grayskull base campaign, and this is the top table version if the rebels have the points lead going into the 4th round of missions. So what we have going on here is basically the rebels know that the Imperials are about to attack Grayskull base. So they decide to lay a trap for the Imperials rather than just try and evacuate the base before the Imperials arrive. So they feed the Imperials information that uh, basically the base is more vulnerable than it actually is, and they prepare defenses against the Imperials in the meantime. So when the Imperials arrive, it's actually a trap sprung on the Imperials. So what's going on here is the Imperials have jumped in to assault Grayskull base, but the rebels are ready for them. They're able to position fighters actually in all angles, ready to attack them, and they will have some bombs ready to deploy in the within the Imperials' jump point that will detonate immediately after the Imperials arrive. So let's get started and talk about the terrain for this mission and the setup. The most important terrain piece here is Grayskull Base itself. I'm using the Vassal extension for Heroes of the Turret Cluster. It has some very nice looking base components that I've used to assemble a cool looking Grayskull base here. If you're making your own Grayskull base, it should be about range 3.5 wide, or range 2.5 range tall, 3.5 range wide, and that should get it to about this size of a base, and that's a pretty good size base to work with. The exact size base isn't super important, so if you can't get it exactly like this, try to get it as close as you can, but that's a good size to work with. All right. And this is the Grayskull base is placed at range 6 of the Rebel table edge, which is this one, and equidistant from the neutral table edges. Okay, so next up is starting with the Rebel team. Teams alternate placing asteroid tokens in the play area. There's 8 asteroid tokens to place. The rules for these are they have to be placed beyond range 1 of the table edges, beyond range 1 of Grayskull base itself, and beyond range 2 of each other. After each of these asteroids go down, every single asteroid gets a activated weapons emplacement token, so they're all going to be covered in rebel guns, which will be shooting at Imperial ships automatically every turn, which is kind of bad news for the Imperial player. But keep in mind that they can place up to 4 of these, so they're probably going to be placing a bunch far away from the Imperial jump point here. All right, so moving right along, the Imperial team. Each Imperial player gets 140 points to spend on their squad. The top scoring Imperial gets control of this Raider class Corvette. It doesn't count towards the Imperial player's squad point total, and it is pre-equipped with a single turbo laser and gunnery team in the fore section, and in the aft section a single turbo laser, quad laser, fleet officer, intelligence agent, and optimized generators. If Agent Halden survived Mission 3C, the intelligence agent is replaced by Agent Halden. You can find him along with the rest of the rules for everything in the Shuttle Tidarium holodrive, which is probably going to be linked in this video. The Imperial team has to deploy in a pretty tight deployment area, defined as at range 3 to 6 of their table edge, so 3 to 6 is about here, and beyond range 3 of the neutral table edges. So that really pushes them out into this middle space in the map here, into a little cube like this, and that is one of the principal disadvantages of playing as the Imperial player in this mission is that you're very, very cramped in the beginning of this game. Uh, then the Imperial player also has to deploy before the Rebel player, both Rebel players. Alright, so after the Imperials have deployed, the Rebel players deploy. Rebels only get 120 points in their squad, so as a team, they're operating at a 40-point disadvantage compared to the Imperials in terms of uh, small ship squad point totals. Great. They also have Grayskull base, but then again, the Imperials have Raider, and then you have to also take into account the activated weapons. But 40 points is a pretty uh, big gap, so be careful as a Rebel player. The Rebel players have to deploy at beyond range 2 of any Imperial ships, but that is the only restriction. So anywhere else on the table except within, anywhere beyond range 2 of those Imperial ships. So that's a pretty big area. They will be able to deploy on the flanks of the Imperial deployment. So keep that in mind when you're deploying as the Imperial player. Finally, each Rebel player can place one ion bomb or seismic charge token anywhere in the play area after they deploy. So, it's anyone's guess where they might want to place those, right? Right in here is probably where they're going to go. And those will be detonating. So they'll be detonating at the normal time for bombs, which is at the start of combat phase. So that won't be right away. That'll be after these Imperial ships move. So the Imperial ships will have a chance to move after seeing these bomb tokens. But even so, pretty disruptive, if I say so myself. All right. And the last thing from the setup is that the Rebels have the initiative. So we can move right along to the special rules. There's basically two sets of special rules here to look at. First one is for Grayskull Base itself. Grayskull Base is a mobile huge ship. So you use the huge ship rules for shooting through it, executing maneuvers that overlap it. All those use the same rules as you would for a huge ship. The only difference is that it never moves. Grayskull gains 4 energy at the start of every activation phase. It has a hull value of 15, a shield value of 8. If it gets a face-up damage card, you just give it 2 face-down damage cards instead, so it always takes double damage on a critical hit. It acts at pilot skill 5, and it can perform 1 action per turn. It gets the target lock, reinforce, coordinate, recover actions. It has a bunch of guns. It has a single turbo laser, ion cannon battery, and a quad laser cannon, each of which can fire in any direction you can measure from any part of the base here for those weapons. Grayskull is equipped with sensor team upgrade, weapons engineer, comms booster, and automatic protocols upgrades. So it's important to remember all those as the Rebel player. It's also handy to have a little stat card like this, which you can generate with Vassal, just to keep track of its hull and shield and energy. Right, so the main thing for that is, remember that it's a huge ship. So one of the things about a huge ship is if you collide with it, it's sort of like running into another small ship. You bump back to the position where you wouldn't overlap with it anymore. Be careful about where you overlap with these bases. For example, I think if you manage to overlap it down here, it would be a little tricky to make it out again, because it's hard to plot a maneuver that doesn't overlap. So be a little careful when you are maybe running into that base. Alright, the second set of special rules has to do with the weapons emplacements. Weapons emplacements count as obstacles, using the same rules as asteroids. They can be target locked and attacked as though they were rebel ships. They also interact with bombs just as though they were a rebel ship. So if you lay a mine on top of one of these, like a cluster mine, the cluster mine would detonate, and if a seismic charge goes off near one, the weapons token would get affected. Now, the rules for these missions stipulate that you should be placing the weapons emplacement tokens, which I'm using critical hit markers here to represent, that you should put them on the asteroids. It's a little awkward to do that in Vassal because if you ever click on the asteroid itself, give it a second here, your weapons emplacement token disappears. So, because it's actually underneath this asteroid now. So that's a little inconvenient. So I usually put them just next to the asteroids, and then for all measurement purposes, you want to be measuring from the base of the asteroid itself. Now, let's. We should talk about what tokens they can get. So they can be target locked, so they can obviously receive like a red target lock token. The only other token that they can get is an ion token. If they're assigned an ion token, then they remove that ion token instead of firing during the next chance they would have to fire. Then they just remove one ion token per chance to fire. So you could potentially stack a lot of ion tokens on these guys and put them out of action. But they would probably be destroying them pretty quickly anyway if you were doing that. Alright, so weapons emplacements fire at the nearest enemy ship. They don't pick their targets, they automatically fire at the nearest one. And they fire at pilot skill step 12. You treat all attacks coming from these weapons emplacements as a primary weapon with an attack value of 3, and you treat it as firing outside of its primary firing arc. They don't have any primary firing arc. So if you're at range 1, that would be 4 attack dice that you roll, and if you're firing at something like range 3, if you had one out here, this asteroid, this weapon firing at this TIE fighter would be rolling 3 dice, and the TIE fighter would get a bonus defense dice, most likely, for range 3. One other rule to keep in mind is that if you are a ship overlapping weapons emplacement, you can't attack the weapons emplacement. That's because the weapons emplacement it's an obstacle just like an asteroid, so you wouldn't be able to fire regardless at anything because you're overlapping an obstacle. And likewise, the weapons emplacement cannot fire, but it can only not fire at the ship that is overlapping it. So it can't fire at this TIE fighter, but it would be able to fire at this TIE fighter if this was the situation there. So keep that in mind. Now, when you are attacking a weapons emplacement, it works just like a rebel ship. So if you're attacking a range 1 like this, you get your extra primary attack die. The only difference is that it always rolls 2 defense dice, even if you're attacking like a range 3 or your attack is obstructed. It's always 2 defense dice. And whenever the weapons placement suffers damage, you assign it a damage token. Let's pull out a couple damage tokens here. And if it's assigned more than 3 damage tokens, then you would remove it from the game. And to do that, you just remove this token. The asteroid itself, it sort of like reverts back to a normal asteroid. The weapons emplacement on it is destroyed. The asteroid remains, but it's not going to be shooting at anybody anymore. So basically, they have like 3 hit points, or 4 hit points rather, because they can have 3 damage tokens and stay in the game, but once they get that 4th one, they're out of the game. Alright, let's move on to the end of the game and the scoring. End of the game works just like any other Grayskull campaign mission. The game ends when one side no longer has any ships in the play area. Grayskull base counts as rebel ships for that purpose, so if the only thing that you have left is Grayskull base, you're not out of the game yet. And same goes for the Imperials. As long as they've got a ship on in the game, including the Raider. If the Raider is the last ship remaining, the Imperials are still in the game. And it all ends when there's only one team left on that table. Okay, or if you reach the, there'll be a time limit, a round limit for this mission as well, but that kind of changes depending on how much time is available. Talk to your event organizer will define what that limit will be. Sometimes it has to be shorter if there's a time limit that if they are limited in time. This mission can take a really long time if you don't have a limit of some sort on it. All right, let's move into scoring. If the rebels destroy the Raider class Corvette, or if it leaves the play area at any point, the rebel players score 100 points each. So that's 200 points that go to the rebel players for destroying this Corvette. If Grayskull base is destroyed, the Imperial players each score 100 points. Just like if the rebels destroy the Raiders. The Raider and Grayskull are worth equal points. And it's basically 200 points to the team who destroys the other team's huge ship. In addition to that, players are going to score points equal to the score of all enemy ships destroyed, with the exception of the Raider, which has its own scoring system. If you're paying close attention, you may have realized that that means that ships are sort of double counted when they're destroyed. So if the rebels destroy this TIE fighter, they call it an Academy pilot, 12 points, just like normal. Each rebel player will score 12 points for the destruction of this ship. So that's 24 points to the rebel players. Likewise, players lose points equal to the squad point cost of all friendly ships destroyed. So each Imperial player would lose 12 points for this TIE fighter dying. So that ends up being quite a few points for those ships. Ships that flee don't count as destroyed, with the exception, not quite with the exception of the Raider, but it wouldn't count as destroyed, but they would score points for it. Anyway, ships that flee do not count as destroyed. Players score points equal to double the cost of any enemy ship that flees the battle before the third activation phase of the mission. So if the Imperials immediately tried to flee with these guys, like that, which they could do, Rebel players are going to score a real bucket of points. That's just a lot of points. The Imperial player wouldn't lose points for flying those fighters off the table, but the Rebels would score quite a few. They each score 24, so a total of 48 points going to the Rebels is not exactly great. So I would not recommend doing that. If you fly off the table edge after the second activation phase, so during the third activation phase or later, then you don't lose points, and the other player won't also not score points. So it is a way to cut your losses at that point, but not before. All right, that's all the rules for this mission. Let's talk a little bit about the strategy. The rebels are operating at a pretty bad points disadvantage. If the Imperial player is paying attention to the deployment rules, then they are probably going to stick all 4 of their asteroids way out of the way and leave you as the rebel player with basically only 4 asteroids to place in an ambush position around the Imperial deployment zone. And the rest of the asteroids will only come into play if and when Imperial ships end up in this area or within these ranges of Grayskull, which can happen. But these will be your main 4 weapons emplacements. So be careful about where you put these. try to think, think on it. You have a strategy for these going into this mission about where you're going to put these. Likewise, think hard about what kind of bombs you want to place. You do get to pick after you see what the Imperials are playing with, so it's good to decide at that point whether you think an ion bomb or a seismic charge would be better. Obviously, different bombs for different situations. You will be able to place ships because of how the deployment rules work. You have to be beyond range 2 of the Imperial players, but the Imperial players have to be beyond range 3 of the table edge, so that leaves a good band of space that you can stick ships in along the Imperial flanks here. And that, is a pretty powerful strategic position that you can have. Just be careful that you don't be stupid about it. um, you could, if you divide your forces too much, if you are not careful about, where the asteroids are, um, you could potentially open up Grayskull to being destroyed very quickly, or your ships being, turned on and destroyed in short order. You want to be very careful about coordinating your attack. It's all about coordinating this ambush because the Imperials really do have superior forces in terms of points here. It's also important to remember as the rebel player that your huge ship does not move. So its firepower is limited greatly by the range of its guns. It only has one thing that can fire at range 5 and another gun that can kick in at range 4, and the last one at, I think, range 1 to 2. Uh, so to bring those to play, you would want to have your engagement basically in this area, but that also opens up Grayskull to attack. So it's advantages and disadvantages. But keep in mind that the Imperial player is pretty much always going to have the Raider in firing range of the engagement zone. So be careful that you don't let them leverage that to too much of an advantage. It may be a good idea to try and disable that Raider early on, maybe. As the Imperial player, how you deploy in this little kill box here is really important. You don't have to have all your ships facing Grayskull like I have here. You could have them facing out, or facing anywhere, facing backwards if you want. Just keep in mind that the rebel player is going to see where you've placed your ships before they decide to place their ships. So there's probably a lot of things that you could do to make yourself vulnerable to an attack by the rebels, and there's probably a lot of things that you can do to make yourself resilient. And you just have to really think about what those things are and try and execute them here, and try to prevent the rebels from gaining too much of a early advantage with their ambush. Try and thwart them a little bit. Otherwise, you could be in a real bad position, especially with 2 bombs going off. Your ships are pretty tightly packed, so if you want to avoid those bombs, you'll have to split up. But splitting up could be also quite bad because then there's loads of bad things that happen if you split up. You can't concentrate your fire, etc., etc. It's easy to get picked off, and it's hard to concentrate your fire if you're split up. So how you deal with these bombs, how you deal with your deployment is really important, and it probably determines how the rest of the mission is going to go for you. So think on that. Strategize with your partner, and have a plan going in. Goes for both of you, both teams. Have a plan. All right. Good luck.